Make a start. Yeah. Morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. We're still waiting on a few people, so they can just join, but we've got a really packed schedule today. So we're just going to crack on. We've got some absolutely brilliant speakers. So I'm Caroline. I'm the program manager for Shine, the Employment and Employer Accreditation Program at the North East Combined Authority. And we've got a really interesting session for you today, just to let you know that this has been recorded, and once it's edited, it'll be going on the website as well, so that if you want to watch it again, then you can do. So we'll have that on there within a couple of weeks or so for you to watch. And the previous webinars, if you haven't seen them as well, they're also on the Shine website as well. So today's topic is a really interesting one. So it's health, aging, and neurodiversity. Some really interesting topics. We're also going to cover terminal illness and serious illness in the workplace, and also bereavement. We've got some expert speakers for you today. Also, what we're looking to do is just to help you to manage this better in the workplace. So we've got some brilliant speakers. We were supposed to have Jenny Rolfe with us today, but sadly Jenny's not feeling too well. So we've got the fabulous Nikki from Inspired HR, and she'll be on twice instead. So she's covering Jenny's slot. But she'll be brilliant as usual. So we're moving swiftly on. And if you haven't visited the Shine website so far, then you can scan that QR code there, and that'll help you view the Shine website as well. All ready to start. That's brilliant. First up is Nikki Masterman, who was the founder and CEO of Inspired HR, with, I think, was it 33 years experience in HR, Nikki?
Yeah.
And Nikki's going to talk to you about effectively managing sickness and absence in the workplace in an effective and compassionate way. Over to you, Nikki.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'll tell you a little bit about Jenny just very quickly, who was going to be running this. So Jenny is my head of HR consultancy. She manages all of the casework in our business and looks after all the consultants and makes sure that the clients are all looked after and that their work is done. She's been a HR and employment specialist and professional for over 22 years. She's also a neurodiversity specialist with lived experience in her family and a neurodiversity screener. She's a CIPD level 7, degree in employment law. She's recently also done her employment law with Daniel Barnett, one of the top barristers in the UK. And she has worked in sectors including local authority, hospitality, facilities, consultancy, and she specialises in employee relations, TUPE and neurodiversity. So that's a little bit about Jenny. About myself, I have done HR and employment law for over 33 years. I'm actually qualified by experience. I have been assessed by the CIPD at the highest level. However, I have gone the experience pathway. I am the founder and CEO of Inspired HR, which I launched 9 years ago after spending 24 years in corporates. And then I launched an additional arm to my business 5 years ago, and more formally earlier this year, called Inspired Minds, which is our neurodiversity specialist arm. We provide those services to nationwide HR consultants, companies and global organisations, including people like Tesco, Ubisoft, as we're actually the only employment law and neurodiversity combined business in the UK that I'm certainly aware of at the moment. I'm a specialist and a screener. I've got a background in everything people and HR related. I'm also a qualified neurodiversity coach, and I've been an executive coach and HR coach and mentor for 25 years. I'm also a qualified civil and workplace mediator. I'm a certified DISC profiler. I lecture at Durham University on entrepreneurship, employment law and neurodiversity, and I'm a proud ADHDer, which is why you will see all these different things I'm talking about learning, because I love to learn. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to be covering off in this absence one is I'm going to be talking about health declarations and questionnaires, short-term and long-term absence, fit notes and statutory sick pay, protected characteristics, and the Equality Act and what does that mean for you. I'm going to be touching on the Bradford factor. Not everyone uses the Bradford factor, but I will touch on it. occupational health when you involve them and GPs, and obviously capability and dismissals. Now, I'm very conscious that we could have multiple sectors on here. A lot of the advice that we give is aimed at very much a lot of smaller businesses, but we do have full sector experience, including public sector, large corporates, charities, and also the SME market. Next slide, please. So health questionnaires. So health questionnaires are is basically what it says on the tin. It's a health declaration. It's a questionnaire that you should be doing with all of your employees. Now, these are normally something that you would give somebody at the point they are starting with your business. So they've accepted an offer, you've offered them a job. It isn't really something that should be used as part of a recruitment process. And it's something you normally issue as part of an induction. And the whole point of a health questionnaire and declaration is to understand what support or adjustments that employee may need. It sometimes also gives you a little bit of a heads up sometimes on some future management issues or challenges you may have, or some additional support or adjustments or equipment that you may need to buy. Now, where I talk about these questionnaires, we encourage our clients to fill them out with new starters. If they're a new client to us or it's something you're introducing, please introduce it to all of your staff and ask to do it. Now, you need to create a safe space for these things because not everybody is comfortable talking about their health. And the reality is they're actually under no obligation to actually declare whether they've got disabilities or health issues. Now, normally you will know if you do HR and recruitment that you shouldn't be asking anything health related during a recruitment process, really, unless it's by exception. And that's because of the Disability Discrimination Act and Equality Act that could come into play on that. However, there are exceptions to that. So an example of an exception I can give you is we did help to provide a health questionnaire and declaration that was for an independent school that actually tutors children that have been excluded. And in that particular environment, sometimes safe handling could be necessary by exception. And also there's quite a high level of bullying and abuse that can go on towards the tutors and teachers. So in this particular situation, we actually put in a health declaration questionnaire during the employment process because it was an absolute requirement of that role to be both mentally sound and be able to cope with what may be thrown at them, but also a physical in case safe handling and training became necessary. And obviously safe handling was necessary in that particular thing. So we were able to build a questionnaire that said it is a requirement of this role and health declaration that you're able to safe handle and undergo that training, and also that there is no mental health concerns. Now, we got this signed off with an occupational health provider, and then we also ran it through a solicitor, because asking questions of that nature and being able to justify asking them is a high risk situation. So we, in those particular situations, do get them signed off from a legal entity, which is obviously insured should anything ever arise. Now, these, again, should not be issued as part of the application. If something comes through on that declaration, we have ours split up into separate sections that covers physical, mental, neurodiversity, all different things. These should never be used as an agenda for somebody other than to support them and put the right things in place. You need to ensure that you've got a safe space that people feel they can declare and be very open and honest with you on these things. If somebody declares something, it all starts with a conversation. Sit down with them, understand what they mean by their responses, dig a little bit further into it. You may not need to involve HR or seek advice. It may be something simple, putting some changes in place. If, however, there is something on there that you just feel is a little bit out of your depth or you need to get some advice, please do reach out to your HR team or an advisor or consultant that you actually use. When you're internal, that's great. For sometimes services like us, we have clients on pay-as-you-go where it costs nothing unless they pick up the phone and they have a question, and we just charge them for any time used at the end of the month. You don't have to use a company like ours. There's loads of other HR consultants and HR providers out there, but do seek advice because you don't want to be getting caught out on that. Next slide, please. So short-term versus long-term absence. Short-term absence is generally something that is deemed less than 4 weeks. And it's really important with some of the changes that are coming up that you actually manage your short-term absence. They have a high impact on your business. You don't always know when people are going to return. It often leads to crisis management within workload or coverage or things on those days. And it's really clear when it comes to any absence policy that you set your expectations with your employees on what contact notification looks like. So some companies are happy with a text message. Most companies insist on a phone call, and they also insist that the call comes from that individual, unless by exception because they actually can't make a call or contact you because they may have had to emergency go to hospital or something. Their phone's broke or something. So there will be exceptions to that. But generally, your short-term absence is the higher impact one. With your long-term absence, this is generally defined as something over 4 weeks. And normally a long-term absence, you would trigger regular meetings. So sometimes they can start at 2 to 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. It really depends on how long that person is going to be off for. Long-term absence can be a lot easier to manage because you will normally get a fit note with long-term absence, and it will give you an indication of what coverage and different things that you need to put in place. Now, there are some instances where although you may not do a welfare or a capability meeting or an absence meeting, it's all different phrasing for some companies, until sometimes people hit 4 weeks, or they're going to hit 4 weeks and go into long-term and longer. However, there is sometimes occasions where you do need to think about, actually, do I need to have a conversation with somebody a little bit earlier? So sometimes we would see that as, if you get a fit note for depression, it's really worth triggering an earlier meeting with that individual, anxiety, stress in work. And that's because it's really important that you explore these things to understand whether it could sit under the Equality Act, whether you need to do any adjustments. Could it involve phased return? Have they got a history that you need to explore and understand? So sometimes, again, even though it's short term and you might think you don't need to do a welfare meeting with that person, sometimes it's case by case, and it's really important that you look at the fit note for the details on that. We normally recommend that you start kind of encouraging a meeting at 2 to 3 weeks before someone hits 4 weeks, especially if they're going to go over 4 weeks. 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and then obviously that will continue, and it will be dependent on what's in your policies and your processes. But again, that regular contact. Now, that meeting doesn't mean you can't pick up the phone and make sure that person's okay, because a duty of care to that individual is so important. So do keep in contact, keep them updated. You absolutely are allowed to contact people during periods of absence. And obviously, please make sure all of that is explicit in any of your absence policies. When it comes to absence, although because short term can have the highest impact on you, it's really important that you do review when somebody goes off sick, whether you're starting to see patterns. So have they requested some holiday and then gone, which was denied, and they've gone sick on those days? Are you seeing patterns on match days? Are you seeing patterns on Fridays to Mondays where people take long days? One of the questions we quite often get asked when it comes to absence is, if it has become apparent that somebody has gone sick, and then on social media, it's all over social media, they're at a concert or they're doing something else or they're going on holiday, yes, you absolutely have the right to have that conversation with them. Don't jump to conclusions, because somebody going on holiday during sickness could be identified or being encouraged by the GP. One of the common questions we also get during sickness is, are they allowed to work elsewhere when they go sick with you? Yes, because if their job that they have elsewhere is different to the one that you do, they can argue that if they've got stress at work in your job, and then in the other job it's fundamentally different, they can actually work elsewhere. So again, don't jump to conclusions. Make sure you're utilising those return to works and those conversations with people, and you're not jumping to conclusions. One of the biggest points I will always say as well when it comes to short-term and long-term absence is, please don't mix up any kind of disciplinary sanctions for absence with normal conduct. They should never be mixed. They should always sit separately. So if somebody has got say a conduct verbal warning, and now you're going to escalate and give a warning for absence due to high amounts of triggers and impact on the business. Please don't escalate it based on the conduct. This should always be run separately. Capability, conduct matters, and normal conduct matters are two different things, and that's a common one we sometimes come across. Next question, please. Next slide. Okay, so fit notes and SSP. So somebody can self-certify for the first 7 dates. They're not required to give you a fit note. However, from a day 8 of absence, an employee should be providing a fit note. Now, there's a common misconception that fit notes can only come from a GP. They can't. The laws have changed over the last couple of years. We're now starting to see fit notes coming from nurses, occupational health, pharmacists, online systems and providers, physios, pharmacists. So there is different ways fit notes. Just because it hasn't come from their GP doesn't mean it isn't legitimate. But we are also seeing some fake fit notes coming through, so do be aware that you're checking that paperwork is legitimate and coming from a legitimate source. Now, currently sick pay is payable from day 4 of an absence, and the current rate is £118.75, and it is payable for a maximum of 28 weeks. Subject to qualifying criteria under the government. There's again another misconception that SSP is claimable from the government. It's not. Maternity pay is, but SSP is not. That is payable by the business. Now, this is why it's so important when you're getting fit notes that you're looking at whether they're fit to work, part to work, is there any adjustments? One of the misconceptions with fit notes as well is that you have to take the advice given in them. Your business may not be able to do that. Some of the suggestions that come through on reasonable adjustments, your business or organisation may not be able to accommodate, and that's okay to say you can't do that, but please make sure that you document the reason behind that in case it is ever challenged a little bit more. Now, something to be aware of, from April 2026, the SSP will be payable from day 1. Now, some of the organisations that are on this call may have company sick pay, which means they're pay enhanced, but in the small SME market, SSP is normally the common one, which means for the first 3 days, nothing is payable when SSP applies, and that does sometimes help smaller organisations manage their absence, because sometimes it kind of prevents those, am I going to take a duvet day? Could I really go in? People sometimes will make more of an effort to go into the business. However, in April 2026, SSP will be payable from day 1. Now, not only will it be payable from day 1 under a day 1 right, which means sometimes those am I well enough to go into work are going to be removed. They are also going to remove the lower earnings limit. So at the moment, the criteria for SSP payment is you have to earn £125 as well, minimum on average, to be considered or allowed to earn SSP under the criteria. However, when the day 1 right comes in, that lower earning threshold is going to be removed, which means for somebody who earns less than that current threshold, they are going to become eligible along with everybody else for SSP from day 1. Now, that in itself, we know, and it may be because we deal with a lot of dispute resolution, we think that's going to trigger a higher level of absence, especially for those where they no longer need to think twice about taking time off in the first 3 days. It's going to increase the short-term impact. And also for those that now become eligible for it, imagine you've got 1 day worker and they're feeling a little bit off, and maybe if they weren't getting paid for the first 3 days, they may not have got paid for it, so they've gone in, and it's not contagious, and they genuinely could work through it like many of us do sometimes. Obviously, pointing out when people are genuinely sick, that is absolutely acceptable and support them. But what we will see is where individuals sometimes use it as a bit of a duvet day or a day to go off. Now, for those that wouldn't have previously got SSP, but will now be entitled to day 1, and obviously they may not have got it on day 4 historically, imagine they're a 1 day worker, that is actually going to mean they will get 80% of their pay. So if they're a 1 day worker and they wouldn't have got paid for it historically, they actually will now get 80% of their pay. So we do think that's going to impact on the high levels of absence. So it's really, really important that you start looking at your processes, your triggers, and managing absence really appropriately, fairly, give support, but also manage those duvet days, and intermittent high impact absence. Next slide, please. So, occupational, bear with me, my slides, I've lost a slide, bear with me. Oh, so disability and protected characteristics. There's a lot of ill health that automatically come under disability and could lead to a disability discrimination, and also obviously the protected characteristics impact upon this as well. Now, disability is basically defined as a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial or long-term negative effect on your ability to do your normal day-to-day activities or job. There's a real misconception when it comes to the Equality Act and that particular clause that people really hone in on the substantial wording. However, I would like to point out in a legal definition and in a court of law, a judge will look at substantial as anything that is more than minor or trivial. So where in our minds we think as substantial as this, if you ever end up in court with a judge, all he's looking at is, was the impact on them a definition of more than minor or trivial? And it's catching a lot of businesses out at the moment. It's so important that you remember that, because what you may think is substantial may not be. And we are starting to see quite a lot of claims and successful wins on the back of that minor or trivial area that the judges are looking at. Now, it also normally has to potentially last 12 months or more than 12 months to also be defined under the Equality Act. However, there are exceptions. If somebody is diagnosed with cancer, they are immediately protected under the Equality Act. If somebody declares they believe they are neurodiverse, they potentially are also going to be covered and are expected to have reasonable adjustments under the Equality Act. So, and that is because if someone is declaring they are neurodiverse, that is absolutely a lifelong condition. So is cancer. Another watch out when it comes to cancer is if somebody has the all clear, it doesn't mean they're not protected. Once somebody has cancer, they are protected for life. So please be aware, and I would absolutely expect any business that does things right, fairly and well, to make sure that anybody that is going through that is completely looked after and supported anyway. There should be no question. And in the reality of whether somebody sits under the Equality Act or not, there is a duty of care to look after your people. And yes, we can be very pragmatic and no nonsense, but you have a duty of care to make sure your people are supported and looked after. One of the big watch outs as well under the Disability Discrimination and Equality Act is disability by association. Never assume that they do not come under this and are not entitled to any protection, support, rights or anything like that because they are not the person. It actually could include discrimination by association. So they could have a child that has a long-term condition that will protect them and mean that you need to consider this when you get any requests for support or flexible working or adjustments or anything like that. Disability by discrimination should also be considered. Have they got other factors outside of themselves that you need to consider and factor into any decision making or support that you're given? Next slide, please. So the Bradford factor is something that is used to work out and trigger how you manage. Now, I'll be honest, within our business, we only have one client out of 200 that use the Bradford factor, and they are a big global organisation. The Bradford factor is a calculation that a lot of sometimes public sector or larger organisations, I know when I worked in some of the bigger organisations, they used Bradford factor in my corporate days. Now, it's a calculation that's used by day occasions and how many days in total they've had off that gives you a score. So, for example, if someone's had 2 occasions and 5 days, then it would be 2 occasions times 2 because it's always the occasions. So if it's 2 by 2, and then the days by 5, that would then give you a score. Now, within businesses, they will then have trigger numbers of what does the absence process look around that and how does that trigger. So generally For Bradford factor, someone below a 50 Bradford factor would be deemed as a good absence. Someone in excess of 200 would be as a bad absence. And then you get things in between. Businesses sometimes have trigger points of maybe a first absence meeting on a score of 75. Some maybe at 100 or 150, and then manage that process through a particular score. We don't encourage that in small businesses. What we tend to encourage is a trigger one instead. So you should always be doing a self-cert meeting and a return to work with every absence anyway, just to make sure they're okay and they've got support in place, and explore are they getting treatment and anything else is needed. We tend to say that when somebody has had a second absence within a rolling 6 months, that triggers a meeting. It doesn't mean you're going to take action. It simply triggers a meeting. Third occasion within a rolling 6 months, and then 4. And again, what you do is those meetings are dealt with on a case-by-case situation that enables you to consider all factors, any disabilities that are affecting the absence, so that you can remove them, so you're not factoring in. So say, for example, someone's had 2 absences and it's disability related, you may need to exclude them from the calculation and the consideration for an escalation in process. Be very careful of those things. Always consider whether any of those absences are disability related, because that will affect how you manage and support that individual. So Bradford factor, as I say, isn't really something we use. We tend to use triggers. Next slide. Occupational health. So occupational health is something that we recommend. Sorry, bear with me, my slides have got mixed up. Bear with me. Okay, so occupational health. Now, one of the things that people historically done, and I've done this in my career as well, is when you need additional information regarding an individual, there is a common practice to request a report from a GP or a consultant if they've got an escalation of health with the hospital. However, in the legal field where I work with a lot of barristers, there is a common conversation where they actually believe, and judges believe, that an occupational health report will trump a GP report. Now, we work with a lot of GP surgeries, and I've had this debate with GPs on a number of times. And the reality is GPs don't like doing reports. They don't have time. They spend very little time with an individual. And the truth is that a GP may not always be very pragmatic and honest in their opinion, and they certainly won't comment as to whether disability discrimination could apply. They've literally got 10 minutes with people. They don't know the person's job description. The reason that barristers and judges often will feel that an occupational health report will trump a GP report is because they'll normally spend at least an hour with that person. They'll look at their job description. They'll have an in-depth conversation with them. They'll really get into it, and actually they can form an opinion on whether that person is likely to come under the Disability Discrimination Act and the Equality Act 2010 as well. So we quite often recommend occupational health over a GP report. They're obviously a lot quicker. Occupational reports, we use a fantastic provider in Newcastle that quite often turns them around in a week for us. And the reason we work with them is they're quite unique. They will involve you in a pre-meeting, so you can help them understand what job that person does and what is going on within the workplace. They then have that meeting with the individual, and then they have a post meeting with the employer to give immediate guidance on support and give you an idea of what's going to come in the report without breaking confidentiality as part of the consent. But it gives you immediate things that you can put in place to support that person if it's phased returns and things like that. It covers reasonable adjustments. They will be honest as to whether that sometimes they can be quite pragmatic as well and say, actually, that person can't do that job anymore. And that sometimes helps you make decisions as to whether they should be in work, shouldn't be in work. Is there any adjustments? Is that the right job for them? What can you be doing to support them? They can also request reports from GPs. They can also recommend counselling, other therapies. They can get reports from consultants, and it's very detailed. So we do what normally go occupational health instead of GP reports for all of those reasons. Most companies start at around 295 plus VAT for 295 for those. You shouldn't be getting charged VAT on an occupational health bill because they don't normally charge for that. So that's occupational health. And then I think the final slide is capability, which I will try and go through very quickly because I'm conscious of time. So capability, someone's been on long-term sick, you've done everything you can, you've had regular meetings, they've exhausted their sick pay, their absence continues. Capability, dismissal by capability, ill health should always be on a case by case, and it should be looking at things the things that you should be factoring before you go down that route is, have you really met with that person, done everything you can? Have you discussed returns and phased returns and adjustments? Is there reasonable adjustments? Where are they within their sick pay? Are they still entitled? Please try and avoid terminating people whilst they're still entitled to sick pay where possible. Sometimes a judge will hold that against you. Think about, is there alternative jobs? Are they entitled to income protection? Could they get their pension? There's so many different things that you need to factor in. Now, they can be quite high risk, and I know depending on whether you're in a small business or a high business, the timeframes on them can differ quite substantially. So sometimes a larger organisation with insurances or company sick pay will be a little bit longer than a small business that can't cope long term. Please do seek advice from HR or a specialist in relation to any decisions to dismiss by ill health capability, to really make sure you've had occupational health reports, you've done everything you can, you've explored everything, you've had some really meaningful meetings with those individuals to see if they can return. And please, when you do a meeting where you could be considering dismissal, please make sure that person is aware in writing that that meeting could lead to ill health capability dismissal. So there's no big surprises for them in that meeting, same as you would in any process like that. And I think that concludes it. Obviously, if someone's dismissed by capability, please be aware, notice and pay does apply. It's not like summary dismissal, and obviously outstanding holidays will apply as well. And yes, they do continue to accrue their holidays during periods of absence. Any questions?
So I think what we'll do, thanks so much for that, Nikki, because we've got a load of speakers to come. We'll answer questions at the end, if that's all right.
No problem.
And brilliant, loads of great information there, Nikki. Obviously, it is a complicated thing to navigate. Obviously, this webinar will be recorded as well, and so we'll be putting this on the website if you want to revisit it again. And then also when that's edited down, we can also send it round for people to watch again as well. So thank you so much for that, Nikki. Insight is always really welcomed. So the next speaker today is a lady called Janine Jonchek, and Janine is a program manager for the Internet of Caring Things at Newcastle University. And Janine is going to talk to you about as we have an ageing workforce, how to support ageing and life's transitional stages in the workplace. Over to you, Janine.
Remember to unmute myself. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to be here. Next slide, please. I want to start with a question. I want you to sit with this for like 1 second in your brain. How old is old? What's your number? Is it 30, 40, 50, 60, 107? How old is old? What we find what we typically find when we ask people this question is people see old as maybe 10 or 15 years away from their current age. So when I was 20, I used to think 40 was really old. Now I'm 51, I actually think 107 is quite old. Not really old, quite old. For me, age is really just a number, and old really, for me, reflects more like a feeling. I feel old when something hurts, or I feel a bit vulnerable or not valued. So I just wanted to start with that. So at the National Innovation Centre for Ageing, we're really dealing with a lot of the bias around ageing and old, because people think of us as numbers, and we're trying to flip the narrative on ageism. I want you to think of like old, beautiful trees. We cherish their resilience and their splendour as their with old, if you like, and in lots of cultures it's quite the same. Next slide, please. So I want you to think about this new demographic of older customers, consumers. So your employees are exactly the same as this. We've got diverse needs and interests and vibrant lifestyles. You can't put us in boxes depending on the number of times we've revolved around the sun. Next slide, please. So National Innovation Centre for Ageing, this is our mission statement. We're based in Newcastle Helix. We ultimately help businesses bring products and service to market that help people live better for longer. In a nutshell, we help businesses understand their customers' needs and wants by doing surveys and focus groups. We do user testing, we do app designs, and we also look at future trends and signals. And I'm going to be using some of those future trends and signals on the future of work in a few slides. So next slide, please. Because humans are at the centre of everything we do, we work with our sister organisation, which is called Voice. Anyone can become a member of Voice. It harnesses lived experiences, both professional and non-professional lived experiences. And ultimately, you can get involved in research and or product testing and designs and help influence the future. Next slide, please. So why does this matter? This is ultimately what we're here for. And like I said, I'm going to share some of the futures work that we did on the signals on the future of work. Next slide, please. This might come as a surprise to some people, but there are currently over 1 billion people over 60 right now, or in 2022. By 2050, there's going to be 2 billion of people over 60. In 2050, I'm going to be 75. I used to think of 2050 of this space age time, but actually it's not that far away. And if everyone retires when we're 66, which is the current typical age of retirement, there's not going to be very many people left in the labour market. You might be aware the manpower, this is already visible today. There's the Manpower Group, which is a workforce solutions organisation, have reported this year that 74% of employers are struggling to find the skilled talent that they need. You might also be aware that Denmark have increased their retirement age to 70. In 2028 in the UK, it's going to be 68. But retirement is an interesting concept. Next slide, please. We have to acknowledge that work is a really important, influential part of our lives. And it's not really a straight line journey anymore. It's not like education, employment, retirement. It's actually much more, there's much more reinventions and many more transitions. We're seeing lots of people retraining and starting new careers, going back to university and embracing lifelong learning. People are starting to reassess life and its purpose. And this was really highlighted during COVID when we started to see this transition. You might identify that yourselves, the big reset. So you might be also interested to find out that intergenerational teams outperform age homogenous teams. They tend to have stronger problem solving, creativity and decision making. And when you consider people changing careers and retraining, that also brings in that diversity of knowledge sharing across disciplines, which is super valuable. Next slide, please. So in the futures work that we did, this horizon in work, we found these new non-negotiables. This is really important to employers when they're choosing who they work for and who they continue to work for. Work has become untethered itself from like fixed constraints, so we're not stuck with locations. There's people kind of expect hybrid, or you might have heard of digital nomads. That might not be right for your organisation, but it's important to people. People are gravitating towards organisations that align more with their purpose and demonstrate social responsibility and have integrity. People are valuing more meaningful connections and relationships that support them mentally and physically. So these 6 new non-negotiables that we've found was really about flexibility that reflects real life. So a job that flexes with the circumstances as we're navigating the complexities of life, like that could be health challenges, caregiving responsibilities, even sabbaticals. Lots of organisations are allowing people who have long service to go on sabbaticals, not just at the university. And this personalisation over standardisation. So there's this realisation that there's no one size fits all anymore. We're living multi-generational workplaces, multicultural, and it's a multi-dimensional workforce. And that continuous learning is a shared responsibility. With the rise in AI and automation, upskilling is really important. It's really important that employees feel supported in learning, and lifelong learning really is the foundation for unlocking and maximising human potential, and that's for all ages. And that another non-negotiable is that well-being is embedded, that if we're living and working longer, people are less willing to sacrifice their health for wealth. If you like, health is really the new wealth. Security across fluid and non-linear careers as the world works changing and people are changing organisations and careers more fluidly. People want protections and things that go with them, so like portable pensions, things like that, and also some financial guidance on planning as their careers adapt and evolve. And really this purpose and dignity, people are seeking dignity through work, and it's really about alignment with purpose, which is really central to that career satisfaction. So that really talks about an ecosystem of mutual benefit for both the organisation and the people that work within the organisation. I don't know whether this is resonating, you're starting to feel this yourself in your place of work or with your employees. I've certainly recognised this from the team that I manage. So next slide, please. So it's really about supporting our employees through transitions and life events, and it's actually the messiness of real life. So that's, and the main point I want to get across here is really about the intersectionality of all these things. So marriage, divorce, becoming a parent, becoming a grandparent, becoming a dog parent, becoming a carent, which means caring for our older family. It might be helping a loved one live with dementia or other conditions, your own health related transitions like pregnancy, menopause, or illness, financial worries, moving home, dealing with loss. And it's really thinking about, you know, often someone's getting divorced, they've got teenage children, so they're going through menopause, they've got financial worries, and their parents just been diagnosed with dementia. So it's kind of like, how is that employee managing and understanding how you as an employer can support them better. Next slide, please. Some of the innovations that we've seen in this space, which are really interesting. These might seem a bit wild and wacky, but there's one called Multiply Mortgage, which is a bit like the active travel scheme, where you can buy a bike and you get and you can pay it off as part of your salary. This is the same for a mortgage. Which is, I thought, oh, that would be interesting. You might have seen a new advert on call where you can buy things and that pays off a bit of your mortgage. I saw that on the TV the other day. I thought that was interesting. There's other things like the Neurable, which is like brain sensing headphones that helps employees with focus and understand when they need to take a break, and helps with like mental well-being. And then there's also these exoskeletons which IKEA are using, which are really interesting. So it's like supporting people who are doing lifting more regularly. And when you think of an aging workforce, these might help people do those kinds of work for longer. Next slide, please. So what could your organisation do differently? And so it doesn't have to be these crazy big things like everyone's wearing exoskeletons or you've got screens that help purify the air. That might be beyond what your organisation can do. So what are the other things that you can do? And so it's doing something meaningful that helps people move, look after their physical and mental health, maybe some education on finances, and deal with the juggle of caring for parents and or children or animals. So what happens when children get sick and they can't go to nursery, or your dog's eating something really random and needs to go to the vet? These are the things that impact how people actually work and show up at work and perform. So anything you can do as an employer to support them in those times will actually pay dividends. They'll be less likely to take sick days for these if you're supporting them. So kind of things that you can do: standing desks, walking meetings, micro moments of rest and pause. In the office I work in, we actually have a communal jigsaw. So sometimes people just need a 5-minute mental break and they go and take part in the jigsaw. So it doesn't have to be flashy or expensive. And then what are you doing for lifelong learning? How are you supporting your employers to upskill and keep up to date with all the latest things in AI and automation? So it could be that you have some peer-to-peer learning, you facilitate informal learning circles. It doesn't have to be flashy software. We used to run in the place I worked before, Code Club, and we now have like expert hour where if you need support with something, if I'm not quite sure about this new chat GPT Claude that's been released or something, I'll go and speak to someone who I know is an expert in the team. So we've created a bit like a guess who's got expertise in certain areas, and we have a couple of hours a week where it's kind of like everyone's available for an hour, up to an hour, to deal with other people's questions. So we peer-to-peer learning support. You can also use wearables, and it doesn't have to be the branded ones. You can actually get a smartwatch for £10 that measures steps and blood oxygen, and also sleep stats. So we actually run a challenge every other month within my team, and that's a movement challenge. And we also try and gamify sleep. So we've normalized talking about people's sleep scores or body batteries, which is actually quite funny. But it helps people understand, like, how's everyone feeling today? People talk about where their body battery is and whether it's like, oh, maybe we need to give them a bit of a break. So it just helps normalize those kinds of conversations. So that's it. This last slide, please, just basically tells you how to contact us if you're interested in working with NICA or the Internet of Caring Things programme. We're a regional business support programme. There we go. Thank you. Sorry for going so fast.
Great, thanks so much, Janine. That's brilliant. I've picked some of things up from that really briefly. Love that idea of that voice platform, and love that idea that health is the new wealth. And I think that's so true if you want to be well in later life. And then also really really simple, easy things to do in your workplace that can help people take a break from their work, and the communal jigsaw. I love that idea. I'm going to take that forward. So we're just running a little bit behind, so we're going to bring the lovely Nikki back on, who's now going to talk to you about inclusivity and neurodiversity in the workplace. Hi again.
Hello, sorry. At least I don't need to talk about who I am again. So next slide, please. And there we go. Okay, so Inspired Minds. Could you press the button, please, for it to, I don't know when we, oh, there's part of my slide missing. Sorry, could you just go back a slide, please? Sorry, I don't know why it's not showing. There should be something, is it? Oh, the whole quote's gone missing. Okay, bear with me. The quote's not coming up on the slide. So we know that neurodiversity is the spark that ignites innovation and success. Together, let's help every unique mind shine. So what does that look like for you when it comes to neurodiversity in the workplace? Next slide, please. So neurodiversity covers multiple different conditions that can be identified under the umbrella of neurodiversity. Some of the most common ones that we often see are dyslexia, Tourette's, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD and dyscalculia. They are some of the most common ones that we see in the workplace. Next slide, please. Now, when it comes to ADHD, if you Google it, it will come up. It's around impulsivity, it will be hyperactivity and inattention. Effectively what it is a dysregulation of different traits. So you might be impulsive. So for those that obviously heard me talk earlier, I am actually ADHD. I meet the threshold for ADHD. However, I do have autistic traits as well. So how does that present in me? I am chatty Annie, I'm impulsive, I love to shop, all those kinds of things. As you can see from my energy level, I can be quite hyperactivity and I talk with my hands and my mouth. But interestingly, I sit still because I plant myself. Now, one of the common things around hyperactivity and the difference between women and men who are ADHD is men will often present as a physical hyperactivity. So when we think of ADHD, we often think of the boys in our class when we were at school that were quite hyperactive, chatty, didn't do anything. For women and girls, we often present that hyperactivity in a different way. We quite often will be busy-brained, so we have a brain that doesn't switch off. And sometimes this is what has led to it not necessarily being recognised in young girls in the schooling system, and it's why so many women are now hitting late diagnosis, because some of the traits and the conditions are becoming more apparent, especially when a woman is going through menopause, because it brings down some of the strategies that we may have put on place without realising it. Next slide. Autism will often be spotted by individuals who like structure. They may not necessarily want to be in a social setting, whereas ADHD, quite often somebody with ADHD will love to be around people, will love to network. They are the life and soul of the party, and they just love that whole social interaction. Autism can have a sensory impact, so that's noise, environment, smells, lighting, so many different things. And obviously that can affect language and communication as well. Now, obviously one of the big things that sits with autism as well is hypersensitivity. So that could be hypersensitivity to smell, to lighting, environment, hot and cold. There's a real kind of hypersensitivity that comes with autism. Now, when a lot of people think of autism, they sometimes think of how it may have been portrayed, especially when I was in school 40 years ago. It was the person that didn't make eye contact. It was a person that they didn't want to be touched. They may struggle. There's a real inconsistency, and it's often referred to as the spectrum. And the reality is that no two people are the same, and never assume that somebody is neurodiverse because of something you have seen, because two people will always be very, very different. And sometimes it's not always as obvious as you think. Next slide, please. Again, some of the more common ones: dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and Tourette's. These are kind of the common things you will see. So dyslexia is normally your difficulties with reading, writing, spelling, and sometimes phonological processing. Your dyscalculia can be challenges with numbers. However, don't assume when somebody is dyscalculia that they have an issue with all numbers. Sometimes it's a certain processing on numbers. Some people could be very good at thinking on their feet and doing numbers in their heads, but they may struggle with things like factors and percentages and speed and recall of numbers. So sometimes we see somebody who's dyscalculia that will have a real variety of traits within that condition. Dyspraxia is very much, it's not always people that are clumsy. Sometimes it's spatial awareness, how close you are to people, your distance on things. It's not always about coordination. And sometimes these will be people that might drop a ball or trip over quite a bit, but sometimes it can also be a spatial awareness thing. And then we've got Tourette's, which is the involuntary repetitive muscle movements that can result in, so it could be tapping a finger, tapping a foot. It could be somebody that has sudden body jolts or sounds. It could be swearing. There's so many different, people assume that Tourette's is people that always swear. It's not always. Sometimes it's people that may have a sudden movement or a particular sound or a tapping or a repetitive movement. So it doesn't always present how people think. So these are some of the most common ones that we see when it comes to neurodiversity. Next slide, please. Now, there's a real misconception, and we do see this because of the diagnoses that come through. Did you know that neurodiversity very rarely sits alone? It co-occurs, and the co-occurrence can have a real impact on people. So, for example, we quite often see ADHD with that meets a threshold for diagnosis with maybe traits that don't meet a threshold of diagnosis with autism or dyslexia. And that can be a real challenge for individuals because quite often it overlaps. But when individuals go down a diagnosis pathway, they don't always understand other things that can be going on. Sometimes people think they may be ADHD because they're seeing traits, but there could actually be other traits. Now, if you have a co-occurrence and crossover of autism and ADHD, quite often we will see individuals that will socially burn out. And they will have the social side of ADHD will be clashing with the social side of autism. And what we often then see is people that come the weekend when they do a job that's very socially active or talking or in networking, they can be completely burnt out by the weekend and they just don't want to get dressed, they don't want to go anywhere. And sometimes you will notice that there will be a difference between what they do in work and what they do at home. So their autistic social preferences may take over at home and they're a little bit quieter, less social, more observant. Within a workplace, if their business or their role has a need to be social, they will normally be very actively social to the point that it can actually burn them out. And then what happens on a weekend, people don't always want to get dressed and leave. And that leads to sometimes to an individual feeling like they're lazy and they're not. They're what we refer to as socially burnt out. And we will see this when we look at some of the traits and conditions going on within individuals and help guide and support them on how some of these things could be crossing over and how they manage them, etc. So yes, a lot of people don't realise there's co-occurrence. Next slide, please. What happens when conditions do collide? So I've just talked about, as an example, autism and ADHD. Now, these three boxes, I would like you to think of these as three individuals. You've got a line near the top of this box that is basically what I refer to as the threshold for diagnosis. So if you have a colour above that line, that means you are going to meet the criteria to be diagnosed in a condition. Now, there is an assumption that when somebody discloses they have a diagnosis of a condition, that individual is the person that is struggling the most. It's an absolute myth. You may have somebody that doesn't have a diagnosis who is actually struggling with multiple co-occurrence and crossover conditions, and they're actually more struggling, but they can't get a diagnosis in anything. So if you take that first box as somebody who's got ADHD, and they've been diagnosed, and clearly you can see they've got traits of other conditions within there, and they may have some that is kind of mid to high level, but they have little traits of other conditions that are affecting them and crossing over. The middle one, imagine that person's autistic. They have, again, some traits, but they don't meet the threshold for diagnosis on other conditions. But then you've got the person on the right that actually can't get a diagnosis on anything, but they've got high traits of multiple conditions. It's very highly likely that that person that hasn't got a diagnosis in that particular scenario is struggling much more significantly than the two individuals with a diagnosis because they have multiple things that are affecting them. So I guess what my slide I'm saying on this is, please don't ever assume that the person in the room with a diagnosis is the person that needs the most support. This is why it's so important that when someone declares they believe they're neurodiverse, we absolutely put the same support in place for them that we do with anyone, because they may be struggling much more, and they may not have an understanding to be able to put strategies and other things in place to help them cope with it. So just food for thought for you on that one. Next slide, please. Executive function when somebody is ADHD is basically how your brain processes and how it does. If you've got an individual in work that is struggling with these particular things, working memory, trying to juggle tasks, struggling to focus, struggling with maybe self-control on behaviours and emotional control, always late for work, maybe struggling for time, late for meetings, overrun, struggling to plan and task initiation because they may be struggling with overwhelm, there is the potential that person has got ADHD or high levels of traits of ADHD that they may need support with. And it's our brain and cognitive in the way that we try to start something, we continue to do something, we learn to focus, and we're able to do. It's called executive function. So if you ever hear that phrase, it's how our brain instigates what we need to do and what we should be doing, and it may be struggling on some of these things. So that's your executive function. Next slide, please. Neurodiversity and ET claims. We've specialised in this area for 5 years, and we became screeners a year ago on the back of this. And we've got a team of ADHD and neurodiversity coaches. We've got a team of screeners. We're currently about to bring a diagnoser into the business. We also have occupational health and legal professionals that specialise in this as well. But in the last year, in particular, employment tribunal claims relating to neurodiversity discrimination have risen by a third. They also rose by a third the year before, and we have seen that about 80% of the dispute resolution we are dealing with is related to neurodiverse. Now, as an organisation, we deal with a lot of dispute resolution. When it comes to neurodiversity, that's because it's normally reached that point, whereas the other 20% is normally where businesses are very supportive, great culture and environment, and they're wanting to introduce a real inclusivity strategy for their business. But specifically, claims relating to autism have actually increased by 40% when it comes to neurodiversity, and they do not need to be diagnosed to bring a claim. This rise absolutely highlights a growing awareness and knowledge that individuals have, and of self-awareness that people are now starting to recognise that they may have conditions or traits of a condition, and that they are neurodivergent. Next slide, please. Now, again, I know I touched on this on the absence one. Under the Disability and Equality Act, a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal daily activities. Somebody struggling to start, somebody regularly late, somebody that is unfocused, again, goes back to, and if I can move on to the next slide, please. Under the Equality Act, substantial means more than minor or trivial, takes longer, for example, takes longer to get dressed, could be consistently late for work, could be struggling to start a project because they're overwhelmed, they're struggling with deadlines, things like that. So some of these could mean that they fall into these categories. Again, usual long term, if someone believes they are, or they're declared or diagnosed, they're absolutely going to fit that 12-month criteria. And then obviously, the Equality Act, I've already covered off what that means earlier. So if we could move on to next slide, please. So you have a duty to make reasonable adjustments. Now, what does reasonable adjustments look like? There should be a second half. Is the picture showing on there? Sorry. I can't see it. The colours being altered on the screen. Sorry. Okay, so what that actually should say, and I should say, sorry, it's just because mine's grey. I don't know why it's showing. It's gone white on your screen. Anyway, the Equality Act and your duty to make reasonable adjustments comes under Section 20. And Section 21(2) is you could have a claim against you for failure to comply with the duty to make reasonable adjustments in discrimination. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of case law here for you. There was a recent case where they failed to make reasonable adjustments because there was no diagnosis. Now, there's a common misconception that if you don't have a diagnosis, and again, I think I've said this a couple of times, you don't believe you're required to make reasonable adjustments or put things in place for them. There is no requirement in a workplace to be diagnosed to come under the Equality Act and have reasonable adjustments in place. An individual simply needs to state, I believe I'm ADHD or I'm autism. So, or I have autism, or I have dyscalculia or dyslexia. From that point on, you have a duty to support that individual and look at reasonable adjustments. In that particular case, because the workplace said, well, you've got diagnosis, I'm not under obligation to do anything, that person at the time of their employment didn't have a diagnosis, but they did get a diagnosis by the time it went to judge. They were awarded $34,458. Another recent case that's been the real talk of the HR field is about an individual who was ADHD and was abusive and using foul language in the workplace. Now, what the judge actually said is he accepts that his ADHD would absolutely impact his ADHD, and his behaviour was a trait of it. However, they actually look at a proportionate means to achieve a legitimate aims test. So this is the legal test that a judge would use. Did the business dismiss him for threatening staff, and were they reasonable in doing so? So when the judge put that legitimate aim test into place and said, were you right in dismissing him, although we acknowledge his ADHD attributed it to the way he spoke to people, and he may have had autistic traits that drove that as well, were you fair and reasonable in your dismissal of him? The judge actually said it was. He already had a foul warning for previous harassment and abusive language. And actually what the judge said was, you made the right decision. Although I acknowledge his behaviour was affected by his ADHD, however, you are still responsible for your own behaviours. And swearing and threatening staff is not acceptable in the workplace. And the judge held up that they were fair in dismissing him for this. So a couple of things there. Diagnosis is not required. Self-recognition is enough in the workplace. And sometimes the business has to consider other things. And it doesn't mean people are completely protected, because people still have a responsibility, dual responsibility for their own behaviour as well. And adjustments can be put in place, but ultimately that sits with an individual. Next slide, please. So what do you do when someone declares they're neurodiverse? Next slide. So if you're in the workplace and somebody declares they're neurodiverse, these are some of the things. Now, feel free to take a picture of this. It's really useful to have. Things you can do and should do to support individuals, but also protect your organisation and the practice of your organisation. Involve a specialist. The reality is you can't know everything when, as a line manager or a HR professional. It's okay to reach out to people. These are services that we can offer on a pay-as-you-go. You just pay for 15 minutes of advice, half an hour advice. We can advise you and things like that. Please instigate the health questionnaires that we talked about earlier in the absence. New starters, regular revisit. We normally recommend annually, just to make sure they're being kept up to date so that your reasonable adjustments and support are up to date. Create a safe and inclusive workspace. It's okay to have a conversation and it's okay to talk to people. We are still seeing some challenges in workplaces where we get rolling eyes and things like that. And we're like, no, these individuals need an inclusive, safe space. They will not declare or state they believe they're neurodiverse if they don't feel safe to do so. So creating a safe space for individuals to be open and honest and get the support that they need, and the success that can bring your organisation is phenomenal. One of the alternatives, we sometimes struggle with screening. So although a diagnosis will tell someone what their medical name is for their condition, it won't tell them their strengths, it won't tell them their challenges, and they won't have an expert helping that person understand themselves or that workplace, what they need to do. Screening enables a strength-based approach for the workplace and the individual that protects the business and enables that person to know more about themselves. Think about screening. We can, you're under no obligation, but it does help the individual and the workplace. Sometimes we will then move them on to a neurodiversity specialist if we're seeing well-being and mental health issues within the screening documents and reports. Reasonable adjustments and signpost, ensure it's tailored to the individual. Do not Google and do not assume that you just do the things that you see on Google. Everybody's reasonable adjustments should be tailored to them and what the organisation can offer. And different things we can signpost to: podcasts, books, coaching, access to work, so many different things. It's really important when somebody declares they're neurodiverse or says they're diagnosed that you set expectations and boundaries. They are absolutely still expected to do their job, but give them the tools to thrive, give them the tools to enable and grow your success, but also support them through their challenges and help them understand what is a reasonable adjustment and what is the workplace responsibilities, what is their dual responsibilities, and ensure you regularly review with that individual. Next slide. I'm not going to go through this in detail. When you have a conversation with an individual, this is a slide that you can take a picture of and use as a guide of what that conversation needs to be looking like in a safe and open space for them. So covering off communication, sensory, social interaction, providing quiet spaces and structure. This slide will help you structure that meeting in a non-judgmental safe space for them. And it will really start to help you think about the different things you can put in place for individuals. So it's so important. The success and thriving that an individual can do with the right support is phenomenal. Next slide. These are some of the reasonable adjustments. Again, I'm not going to go through them. These are all some of the reasonable adjustments that can be considered. If we've done screening on someone, we'll have a look at what we're seeing in the reports and already have a list of potential reasonable adjustments. A reasonable adjustment can vary from work to place. It depends on funds, size of organisation, what they're able to put in place. A lot of adjustments that you can put in place and support are free. Not everything is expensive. There is still access to work, albeit it's taken 12 to 18 months at the moment, but these are all some of the things that you can help individuals with. And sometimes they will know their own answers. Saying to somebody when they declare they are neurodiverse, what adjustments you need will not cut it for them, will not cut it for you, and will not protect you, because a lot of the time an individual actually doesn't know because they don't know enough about themselves. Next slide, please. There is a very fine line between an inclusion and exclusion. We have some fantastic businesses that we are working with that are really making sure that inclusion matters. They are actually offering neurodiversity screening to every employees in some of their businesses, irrelevant of whether someone is, because sometimes people don't know they can explore that. And that is something people are doing as part of their inclusive strategy, not just offering it to individuals when they declare they believe they are, they're actually opening it up to everybody in the workplace. And we're seeing a lot of businesses do that to try and help individuals out of long-term work and the judicial system that are coming to us to help get those things in place and give that confidence to workplaces on how they can support individuals as well. Next slide, please. So I want you to have a think, not for now, maybe after this, what in your workplace could you be doing better, and what could you be implementing to make your workplace safe, inclusive, and be supporting individuals to thrive, which absolutely drives the success of your business, but helps individuals understand themselves better as well. It really can make a difference to an individual. Next slide, please. If you have any questions, we offer a free initial conversation with us. If you've had an employee you want some advice on, that QR code, if you take a picture of that or scan it, we'll put up a call. Initial call is free. No obligation our services. We offer retained and pay-as-you-go, and you never get billed for anything unless you use our service. I hope that's helped.
Thank you very much, Nikki. That was absolutely brilliant and really detailed. We are running a bit behind, so I hope that's okay with everyone. But we've got some really exciting speakers to come, our final speakers of the day. And so I'd love to welcome Neil Campbell from the End Matters CIC, who's also going to bring in Judith Wood Archer, who also works for Society Matters Group, and they're going to talk to you about bereavement in the workplace, terminal and serious illness. Welcome, Neil and Judith.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Neil Campbell, and I've been a specialist grief counsellor, trainer and researcher for the last 31 years. So I sometimes feel as if I'm close to my sell-by date as well. In addition to that, I'm one half of the End Matters, a small CIC company up here in the Northeast, and we do end-of-life planning, which includes end-of-life planning workshops for wellbeing programs. We do grief awareness for the workplace workshops, and we advise organizations on compassionate or even grief policies. And we are also end-of-life doulas. And end-of-life doulas are holistic carers that can be brought in into the home of somebody who's got a terminally ill member of staff. Can I just go back to that first slide? Yes, sir. The TUC Dying to Work Charter, it's a voluntary yet nevertheless excellent initiative whose aims, if employers sign up to it, are, I think, twofold. From a technical point of view, it is to enhance the protection of the employment rights of employees who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness. But from a personal individual point of view is, if employers are signing up for it, the aim is to help members of staff who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness to feel a bit more safe and secure in the workplace, in their employment, and not feel as if they're under pressure to leave work prematurely. It's also about helping to maintain their dignity and self-respect by hopefully a caring approach from employers, and above all, to have the flexibility to decide how they want to work and balance work and life, and obviously all of their treatments, and whether they choose to continue working or not. But I think there's a third aspect to that, and that is that by signing up to it, in a way, organizations are going to enhance the reputation of their organization, and in particular, enhance the morale amongst their staff with a compassionate commitment. And I think that this, certainly from me, anecdotally, that we've heard over the last few years since COVID, a compassionate approach is what staff are looking for since the COVID pandemic. Okay, next slide, please. And today's workplace, as said, can and should play a really significant part in supporting staff and employees, not only those people who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, but bereavement. And I think it's fair to say that in any medium or large size organization, it is likely that just about every single member of staff, managers, etc., will suffer a bereavement during their time in the workplace. So it's not just about terminally ill, it's about staff who are coming back after a bereavement, and also members of staff who themselves are under a great deal of practical, emotional, and mental pressure supporting a terminally ill close member of the family in similar circumstances. Considering the time that we spend at workplace, that's why I say that today's workplace could and should play a significant part. And I just want to refer back to a report that came out. It was in 2013, and it was actually commissioned by the TUC and Brendan Barber. And it was interviewing employees who had come back to work in the previous 5 years after a close bereavement and how they'd been treated. The report itself sadly got lost because at the same time as this report came out and was published, it was the week of the first Scottish independent vote. So all the media attention was north of the border and how it affected the rest of us. But they interviewed 2,500 to 3,000 employees in the public and private sector, and also the voluntary sector, right across the board. And what was incredible is that 34% of those who had been polled had talked about a horrendous experience of going back to work. Managers and staff and HR and occupational health saying the wrong things, inadvertently saying hurtful things, or saying absolutely nothing at all. And 90% of those people polled said that they'd wish their organization had a more compassionate bereavement and grief policy. And I don't think, anecdotally, from our point of view, that much has changed since then. Next slide, please. And of course, the workplace experience for these individuals, so the bereaved coming back to work after a bereavement, the member of staff who has gone through this trauma of now a terminal diagnosis, and also those staff who are looking after terminally ill members of staff, it's an incredibly difficult time for them, both mentally and emotionally. They're going through grief, they're going through stress, and even post-traumatic stress as well. So the workplace experience, in other words, the support and care, or the lack of support and care, can be very beneficial. Next slide, please. You've got to remember as well that when people have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, it does not mean that death is imminent or just round the corner. People who have been diagnosed with such an illness can live with it for months and even years, and can even come back and work very effectively, even though they have this illness hanging over their head. Next slide, please. And of course, what we do need to remember, particularly with terminal illness, is that those people who've been diagnosed with a terminal illness are starting from the minute that they get diagnosis to experience grief. And this is called anticipatory grief, as opposed to post-death grief. And in the form of anticipatory grief, which although it has similarities with post-death grief, are a number of significant differences. And not only is this anticipatory grief affecting the terminally ill member of staff, but it's also affecting that member of staff's family and close loved ones at home. They're both going through that experience together. Next slide, please. And we need to remember that bereavement and grief is still a major cause of stress and sickness absence. Some years ago, I used to do stress management workshops for one or two of the local NHS trusts and local authorities here. And one of the first things on the stress management workshop I would do was a little exercise from two American psychologists, Thomas Holmes and Thomas Ra. And it was an A4 sheet with a whole list of things that could affect you in the workplace and at home. And there was a point score next to it. And if you had anyone on the list, you ticked it, and then we totted up the score at the end. And 300 or more, you needed to sit down and perhaps talk to a counsellor and make some kind of sense of it. Well, the top three in third place with about 65 points was moving house. In second place, separation, divorce, and end of a relationship with about 75 points. And top of the list was bereavement. So not only do we have grief, but we have stress. And so bereavement and grief is still a major cause of stress and therefore sickness absence. Next slide, please. If we could go back, sorry, could we go back one slide? Yeah, I'd like to just hold the slide there for a minute. I've got some basic tips and strategies, but I would now like to call in Judith Wood Archer from Society Matters, who I think has got a few personal anecdotes from the workplace around people going through this kind of experience.
Sure.
Judith.
Thank you, Neil. Hello, everybody. I'm Judith Wood Archer, and I'm Service Delivery Director at Society Matters Group. And I'm not the HR person. I'm a manager of people who deliver the work that we do. And the having bereavement and grief within the workplace, we've got a staff of around 200 people, and so it's something that has impacted us in all sorts of different ways. We had one particular case. We've had a couple of people who have died during service following quite a long illness, and how we dealt with that was through care and compassion, being flexible with their working. I think, Neil talks about how people who may be terminally ill still need to work in order to give them routine, in order to give them a sense of purpose. And so we work with those individuals and understand what it is that they can do, and think about what their job entails and how we might be able to shift some of those duties across to another, how we might be able to delegate some of those duties down. And then, of course, as we move through kind of the journey of the individual, and we come to start thinking about what their end looks like, we're looking after their team members as well. The team members that I'm thinking about were quite long-served employees, and so had really good relationships with their team members. And so it's not just about looking after the individual in their sickness and what happens next, but also looking after the colleagues and making sure that they can understand what's going on, talking with the ill person and making sure that their privacy is protected, but that we've got enough information going out so that they are able to be supported as well, and also supporting family. There's one individual in particular, and I had contact with his wife quite a long time following his death, as we supported her through all sorts of situations that she found, that having never had somebody die before, she didn't know and understand, that whole bureaucracy of dying that exists in our society today. And so we helped her navigate that as well. I'll leave it there for now, unless there's anything else, Neil, you want me to raise.
No, I think so. Just perhaps if there's any questions at the end.
Yeah.
The next slide, please. Just a few points to remember. As we both said before, those with a terminal illness are still useful. They can still work very effectively. And as Judith said rightly, what they need is routine and structure. This is, when they are facing such an enormous thing as a terminal illness, they need routine and structure. In fact, actually, if you look at terminally ill children, it might seem strange to many people, but the aim of the terminally ill child and the parents is to go back to school, even if it's for a few months. So whether it's a terminally ill child or adult, they still need routine and structure, but they also need an understanding and flexible environment about how they can balance personal life, work life, and all of the treatments and medications that are going through. And we need to remember as well that, as I said before, the minute a terminal illness is diagnosed, then anticipatory grief kicks in. So already they are grieving. Next slide. This is why we always stress to organizations that they really do need to have some kind of grief awareness training about what's helpful, what's not, what's the right thing, what's not the right thing to say. And what we do is we find, and I found over the last 30 odd years, is the amount of distress that comes from the stupid things that people say and don't say. So for instance, if bereaved, time will heal, you will get over it, etc. Right across the board to actually not saying anything or changing the subject. This in actual fact causes as much pain to the bereaved as the actual loss itself. And of course, with terminal illness and bereavement, we must not forget the potential emotional impact on colleagues and the kind of support that they might need. Grief is often combined with stress and PTSD. It's one, for me, of the 20 major areas and issues and types of death within the complexity of grief. And it's called the unholy trinity of grief, stress, and PTSD. And many, many bereavements are extremely traumatic. So when staff are coming back, they perhaps have got a combination of grief, stress, and PTSD together. And this is why I think that compassionate leadership is now vital for the modern workplace. And I think it's going to be the in thing for the workplace over the next few years. Next slide, just 2 to go. We okay with slide? Next slide. Oh, there we are. Just some basic tips to organization and employers. A compassionate and effective and user-friendly bereavement and grief policy, not just a statement of how many hours or days you can have off for compassionate leave and a few contact numbers at the end. I think it needs to be a little bit more thorough and comprehensive. Grief awareness really should be part of any staff wellbeing program and part of any workplace stress initiative. And as I said before, we need to make sure that there is good support for workplace colleagues who are affected, particularly by colleagues who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Next and last slide. Oh, we've lost one. Okay. Sorry, there was one after that. Not to worry, not to worry. Okay.
Thanks very much, Neil and Judith. That was great. I think it's just the purpose of these webinars is just to really get everyone to start thinking about what more they could do in the workplace around these things, because a standard policy doesn't really apply. So it's kind of like, what more could you do to help people when they're going through some of these horrific experiences in their lives? And everyone does at some point as well. I know we've run over today, so thanks very much everyone for staying with us. I can't see any questions in the Q&A other than someone asking for Nikki to provide. So I've emailed you, Nikki, for the occupational health service provider. So that would be brilliant, and I'll pass that on. We'll get this recorded and edited as soon as we can. And in the meantime, we'll probably just be able to send these slides around anyway. So if you want to go back over any of it, this is the last one of 3 for Beam 1, and then we'll be working on Beam 2 for early next year, which will probably be February and March. So we'll have some more speakers coming to you for then. And then if you enjoyed today, if you found the webinars helpful, it'd be really great if you could share that on LinkedIn so that people people know that we're building on these. We're trying to make these webinars as useful as possible to give you the information that you need. Massive shout out to our speakers today. They've all been fantastic. Thank you so much. And thanks for coming, everyone. Bye bye.